Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast Hockey. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into everything to do with the Nashville Predators. I'm Cameron.
I'm Noel.
And I'm Nick.
Let's get into it.
Looking at the first offseason under the new GM Barry Trotz, the Nashville Predators added Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Schenn, Gustav Nyquist, and Denis Gurianov.
And what seems to be a completely different direction than previous years in Nashville Predators history, we have some players like Matt Duchene, Ryan Johansson, among others, leaving the team this offseason.
Ryan O'Reilly was brought in through free agency and signed a 4-year, $4.5 million contract. He's one of the best two-way centers in the league, and he's won a Conn Smythe before and a Stanley Cup, so he has some great experience. In recent years, he's dealt with some injuries and had some up and down years. He put up 21 goals and 58 points one season ago. So that's solid numbers for a nice defensive center there. And last year in the playoffs, he had 9 points in 11 games for Toronto.
Luke Schenn is another former Toronto Maple Leaf coming over via free agency. He signed a 3-year, $2.75 million deal. Last season, he showed he was still capable of playing top four minutes and being a good partner for elite defensemen like Quinn Hughes and Morgan Riley. I believe it's because of his high pedigree and the fact that he's able to think the game very well, even though he's slowed down quite a bit in his age. He's also got some great experience as a two-time Stanley Cup winner. Last season, he led the NHL in hits with 318. And as we saw in his run with the Toronto Maple Leafs, he's well known for standing up for his teammates.
The third biggest arrival of note is Gustav Nyquist. This is a guy who's been around the league a bit the past couple of years and has battled quite a bit of injuries. As you can see, last year he put up 27 points in 51 games with the Minnesota Wild as well as with the Blue Jackets. This is a guy that I want to stay healthy as he has really battled injuries. He hasn't played over 80 games much in the last 5 years, only one full season in the last 7 years with Columbus in 2021. So it'd be interesting to see how he fits into this lineup.
Moving on from the biggest arrivals to our future outlook here, Nashville's got some really interesting prospects. The biggest one there being the goalie they took 11th overall in 2020, Yaroslav Askarov, their recent first-round draft pick, Matthew Wood, Joakim Kemmel, who I think they were super excited to get in the first round in 2022, Luke Evangelista, who's projected to make the lineup this year, amongst others who aren't even named here, like Tanner Mollendijk and Reed Schaefer.
Nashville's acquired a lot of draft picks for a team that's still trying to be competitive. Most notably, you see two Tampa Bay picks there in the first and second round. Those are from the Tanner Jeannot trades where they got an absolute haul. So they're looking to maybe move out some of these picks for some players, or they're going to draft them and try and get some really good prospects.
Now, among the prospects we already have in Nashville, this brings us to the prospect spotlight for the team. We've got Yaroslav Askarov, Joakim Kemmel, and Luke Evangelista. The first prospect of note is Yaroslav Askarov, and this is a goaltender who was highly touted to be sort of the next Carey Price or elite goaltender coming out of Russia in his most recent draft in 2020. So this is a guy who was drafted 11th overall, and some people were worried whether they should take him that early. He almost fell to the 15 to the 20 range, but Nashville took him at 11th, and this seemed to be sort of the replacement for Pecorine at the time. Since then, he has played a few years in the AHL. Just last year, he put up a 2.69 and a 9.11 in 48 games in the AHL, which is starter quality considering the AHL season is roughly 72 games long. This is a guy that I am pretty confused about because of his play style. If you think of Bobrovsky as sort of a cat-like controlled figure, I think of Yaroslav Askarov as more of a raccoon. I think he is just all over the place in net. He loses his stick a lot. He plays without his stick sometimes more than he does with his stick, but he catches and he kind of just traps any puck he can find. But this does prove well in good numbers, and I wonder if North American coaching styles will help him sort of refine his game to fit the crease better in the NHL in the future. The second player of note is Joakim Kemmel. This is a high-scoring winger out of Finland. As you can see by the split stats there, he played in the Liga at first and then joined the Nashville's AHL team for their playoff run. And he put up 13 points in 14 AHL games, which is very promising as just a rookie coming out of the men's league in Finland. I can see Joakim Kemmel being a super solid piece in Nashville's future as a prime shooter. As you can see there, he did put up more playmaking points and assists in those AHL games as well, so maybe he does have a little sprinkle in his game that is going to add as he goes to North American hockey. The third prospect of mention is Luke Evangelista. This is a prospect that came straight onto the scene in the NHL after a solid AHL season as a pretty much AHL rookie, having only played 14 games in the AHL the previous season. He played 49 games and put up 41 points as a rookie. And despite being drafted in the second round in 2020, I could have seen him in the first round, as the following year he put up 111 points in 62 OHL games as the London Knights captain. So this is someone that I'm really excited for. He's a dynamic, electric forward with a lot of speed, high skill, and NHL ready practically at this point, as you can see by the 15 points already in just his first 24 NHL games.
Moving on from the prospect spotlight to the Nashville Predators projected lineup for the 2023-2024 season. It starts with that first line there that is two-thirds new players. So Philip Forsberg has been a mainstay in Nashville since he came over via trade from the Washington Capitals. He was injured last year, hoping to have a healthy season this year. Ryan O'Reilly, the new acquisition we just touched on, and Gustav Nyquist fill out the rest of that first line. So it'll be interesting to see how that line meshes together, as they're pretty new to each other. On the second line, we have Denis Gurianov, Tommy Novak, and Luke Evangelista. So that'll be an interesting line as well, as Gurianov is a new player to the team and Evangelista is entering his rookie year. On the third line, we have Jussi Parssinen, who actually played pretty well at the end of last season, which was surprising. He kind of came out of nowhere, so interesting guy to have on the third line there. Cody Glass, who's been a bit of a reclamation project for the Nashville Predators, and Philip Tomasino there as well. On the fourth line, we got Kiefer Sherwood, Colton Sissons, and Yakov Trenin. So not exactly the greatest fourth line. I don't mind Kiefer Sherwood, but not the most competitive fourth line in the world. And then we got Mark Janowski and Cole Smith as extras.
Now on to the projected defensive pairs for the Nashville Predators. We see top defenseman Roman Josi stay at the number one spot this year. We look to carry that decor through Roman Josi solely, because down the lineup it gets pretty bleak. You've got Ryan McDonough, who's getting older every year, and I wonder how his development will go in the Nashville system, because he's sort of a long-time number one / number two guy, but now he's sort of a second pair shelter guy. So it'll be interesting to see how much effort he puts in this year, alongside guys like Luke Schenn and Tyson Barrie. And on the third pair, you've got Jeremy Lauzon and Dante Fabro. You've also got Alexander Carrier and Kevin Gravel as extras.
And finally, looking at the goalies here, we have one of the elite goalies of the league in Juuse Saros as Nashville's starter. He's somewhat of a smaller goalie, but he's so incredibly athletic that he really makes up for it, and he truly is elite. And then we have Kevin Lankinen, who is a serviceable backup. He posted some good numbers through 20 games last year. And then finally, there's Yaroslav Askarov, who we mentioned before as a prospect. I'm assuming he's going to be spending most of his time in the AHL, though, behind these two NHL caliber players.
Moving on from the lineups to our storylines for the 2023-2024 season for the Nashville Predators. The first storyline there is just the fact that they've got I think it's 7 NHL defensemen who make over $2 million on two-way deals. So the 3 guys pictured there in particular are Jeremy Lauzon, Dante Fabro, and Alexander Carrier. All 3 defensemen who make over $2 million, but not all 3 of them are going to be able to crack the every night lineup of 6 defensemen. So it kind of just begs the question, is one of these guys going to get moved before or during the season? If it was up to you guys, would you move one out, or would you just roll with an extra defenseman who's carrying a $2 million cap hit?
I mean, having depth on defense is never an issue. People are always going to go down, but having to scratch a $2 million player night in and night out doesn't really make sense. So might as well get some value there when you can. Um, as far as who would be moved out, I really don't have an opinion. These are all just more depth defensemen. Like they are NHL caliber, but none of them move the needle for me.
Yeah, I really was hoping that Dante Fabro would take that next step as a young defenseman. We saw him as a pretty decent Canadian talent, and he has since sort of plateaued as a sort of like depth defenseman option in the NHL. I wish he was sort of more of an offensive spark for the team, but now he's sort of below the depth chart of guys like Luke Shen and Alexander Carrier. So I think for a team like Nashville, who could either be in the playoffs or slightly out, I wonder if maybe they do move a guy once they figure out if they're out completely.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think of the three, personally, if it were me, I'd probably look to move Lazon just because I think he's probably got the lowest ceiling of the three of them. And I think all three of them have pretty comparable floors. I know Lazon's a pretty physical defenseman, and you might be able to entice a team like Toronto or somebody like that to take a flyer on him if you decide you want to move one of them. Moving on to our
He
next.
sounds pretty
Oh,
similar to sorry, Kim. He sounds pretty similar to Shen in that sense. I mean, a low ceiling, high floor, physical defenseman. So yeah, he
yeah,
could be an extra for sure.
he doesn't quite have the like pedigree and skill set that Shen has,
Hmm.
I wouldn't say, but he's kind of more just a bruiser. Like he really just is a physical
Hmm.
defenseman. I don't know if he's very skilled, but throws his weight around for sure.
Yeah, and the one thing I would wonder about is with the signings to the 3 year deal at 2 million per for this guy. Him and Luke Shen are both with 3 years remaining for the team. They've definitely committed to various defensemen and decided not to
Hmm.
commit to others, like Barry on a 1 year and Carrier on a 1 year, Dante Fabro on a 1 year with RFA arbitration expiry. They've got two guys that they've clearly committed to, which are Luke Shen and Jeremy Lazan, which is both surprising and interesting because it does tell us a bit about the direction we think this team may be going. So I do wonder who moves, but they probably have to move somebody.
Yeah. Moving on to our next storyline here, we just have the fact that Yaroslav Askarov found himself in trade rumors over the summer, which was fairly surprising. I mean, at one point in time, people thought that the team would actually look to move Juuse Saros and have Askarov be the goalie of the future. But it seems like the team has pivoted and has now decided that they want to move forward with Juuse Saros, the 28-year-old netminder who has established himself as probably one of the top five, maybe even top three goalies in the NHL at this point. And as a result, they've decided that Askarov might be expendable, and they were even discussing moving him at last year's draft in order to move up and get somebody they wanted higher up in the draft. So I guess just what you guys think about how the surprising turnaround, like it just seems kind of weird. It leads into our next storyline as well, but
Yeah, goalies take so long to develop, and I think if they were looking to trade Askarov, they'd be moving with way too much haste. I mean, it's he played a lot of games in the AHL last year, like definitely starter amounts, but he didn't dominate. He posted good numbers, but he didn't dominate. So I don't think this guy's quite ready for the NHL yet. I know he had some games last year and looked solid, but another year in the AHL to maybe even two to further his development until he really proves that he's too good for that league. I don't think he should be traded by. I think it'd be a mistake if they did it.
And I mean, he's also hasn't played much since 2018, where he played 31 games in the MHL. I'm looking at his sort of breakdown year by year. He's playing backup minutes, so he's playing 6 to 10 games each year, which is not a great for a young player's development, sitting on the bench for 3 quarters of the season. So his first full season, it's potentially that he got some fatigue being in all that game schedule, whereas he was playing like one game every 4 weeks probably in the other leagues. But I looked for him I thought he'd be a huge piece of Nashville's future, to be honest. And I thought that whether or not Juuse Saros moves, you can't go wrong with two goalies, especially once Juuse Saros reaches a certain game limit. No goalie in this modern NHL game is going to be able to survive 65 plus games. So once Nashville needs somebody else, I do wonder why they wouldn't want to go to this guy and figure out what he has before they send him off somewhere and he possibly dominates elsewhere.
yeah, I think a similar situation to the one Askarov finds himself in is the one that Ilya Samsonov found himself in a year or two ago with the Washington Capitals. Another super high draft pick out of Russia, just didn't really seem to transition super well to North America right away. And Washington gave up on him too early. And last year, he really had a coming out party with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, kind of like you said, Noel, like you don't want to give up on these guys too early and then kind of have, I guess, seller's remorse later on.
Yeah, and further to that, Samsonov is now 26 compared to Askarov being only 20 years old. So this
Exactly.
is a guy that has plenty of years to figure himself out and establish himself. He's already done a whole year in the AHL, which few 20-year-old goalies are doing with decent numbers like that. So I definitely want to wait on this guy.
Yeah. I mean, like we say, the hardest part with Russian players often is getting them to North America. So as soon as you get them to North America, get them in your system, uh, a lot of times it's good from there. So yeah, I definitely think it's interesting. It'll be if they move him, it'll probably end up being it could end up being a really big mistake, but only time will tell. Maybe they end up making the right decision and holding on to both or sticking with him, but who knows? Moving on to the last storyline here. It's just kind of Barry Trotz has kind of made some confusing moves since taking over the Nashville Predators. So at the deadline under David Poyle, they sold big time. They got rid of Ekholm and Tanner Jeannot. Um, really got rid of some players that were expected to be part of winning here in future years. Um, so it really looked like they were going to tear it down to the ground and start over. So then, further to that point in the offseason, they bought out Matt Duchene and traded Ryan Johansson at 50% retention. They then turned around and signed Ryan O'Reilly, Luke Shen, and Gustav Nyquist, all to like multi-year deals at quite a bit of salary. It just seems like contradicting moves, in my opinion. So I'm really curious as to whether they're rebuilding, retooling. I have no clue what direction they're headed in.
Yeah, Nashville just barely missed out of the playoffs last year. It was really down to the wire, and they were one of the teams just on the outside looking in. So it doesn't really make sense for them to be doing a full rebuild unless they really didn't like the players they had. So I think part of it comes down to Barry Trotz wanting to put his stamp on the team, wanting to build a team like that. He believes in his identity because he took over from David Poyle as the second GM ever in Nashville history. So I think it really was just Barry Trotz, whether you agree with it or not, or like agree with the moves that he made or not. I think it was just him wanting to put his identity down and put a stamp on the team.
Yeah, I find it to be such a surprising stance because this is a team that has been close, but not close enough to greatness in the playoffs. I'm looking at their past 5 seasons. They've lost in the first round, they've lost in the first round, they've lost in the qualifying round for COVID, and they lost in the first round as well. Not to mention, most recent year in 2023, they did miss the playoffs. So, and that all comes when they lost in the finals in 2017, which is really unfortunate, going all the way that year, but not far enough because they don't have a cup to their name. The Nashville Predators really are a mystery to me as well with the idea of buying out Matt Duchene. This is a player who put up an 86-point campaign and less than a year and a half later is bought out of his $8 million contract. This is going to hurt the Nashville Predators eventually because, for example, in the 2025-2026 season, the cap hit that Matt Duchene is going to have on the Nashville Predators for not playing for them is $6.555 million. That's how much
Holy.
Nashville is paying to not have Matt Duchene play for them in that specific year. The other years are around 2.5, then 5.5, and then a few 1.5 years after that. But 6 years of Matt Duchene's money on their books that prohibits them from spending that amount of money each year is really shocking to me for a guy who put up way over a point per game, which only a certain crop of the NHL can actually do. 86 points is nothing to look away from. That is a talented offensive option, and he's only 32. He's not this 37-year-old stuck in a crazy loop of being bad. He is a decent skater with an active shot, and I see him doing really well with Dallas, which is surprising too that when you buy him out, he signs with a division rival. So that's going to bite them right away this season, probably when they play each other against the Stars and the Predators.
Yeah, it was. I mean, buying him out was a pretty shocking decision. I mean, I think moving on from Ryan Johansson the way they did was surprising as well, but it's really not nearly as detrimental as the buyout because it's half the cost, really, essentially, because they have to pay out the whole contract still. So it just is a totally baffling move. And then to go out and get a guy like Ryan O'Reilly, like it's totally different players, but to get rid of one aging center and then turn around and sign another one in free agency, it seems so contradictory. And with the additions they made, it's like, wouldn't you want Matt Duchene in your lineup with these guys? It just doesn't seem to make any sense at all. But yeah, it's a very
we've
it was a
we've seen some questionable decisions from Nashville management in the
yeah,
past, and like I'm mostly well, first of all, signing those contracts obviously put them in this situation, but
yeah,
I also want to refer to the Tolvanen or yeah Tolvanen
yeah,
wavered like they put him on waivers and he lit it up in Seattle after he was claimed. So
Yeah.
maybe Poyle's still kicking around too with Barry Trotz making some questionable decisions, and I do agree it's so conflicting. I mean those the buyouts and the trade really signaled rebuild. And then what, 2, 3 weeks later, they go out and get some like not even young players. Luke Shen and Ryan O'Reilly are pretty old. Same with Gustav Nyquist. So it's such a confusing time to be a Nashville fan.
And the fact that they wanted to trade Yaroslav Askarov, but they also wanted to buy out Matt Duchene, their best player from that season,
yeah.
is just something that very few teams do in the NHL. That's for sure. They do not trade their top prospect or buy out their best player within a year. That very does not happen at all, really.
No, it's just super weird. So I guess this season will how they perform this season will really dictate whether or not, because if they end up making the playoffs, it'll all be forgotten. It'll probably be fine. But if they miss the playoffs this year, it's going to be an absolute disaster. So moving on to our final segment here, just kind of a broad overview of the offseason and season for the Nashville Predators. Beginning with the offseason grade, it's going to be a C, and that's just like we got into. It's just a very, very confusing offseason from that started with David Poile and ended with Barry Trotz taking over. Just doesn't really make any sense to get rid of two of your aging core by way of half retention trade and buyout and then turn around and sign players just as, if not older than them. It just doesn't really make any sense at all. So that's why that's going to be a C. The offensive strength is going to be a C plus. They got weaker there probably this offseason, and that's somewhere that Matt Duchene probably could have helped them out. So that's kind of ironical. But the next spot here, defensive strength is going to be a B. Uh, that's I think their defense is solid, but at the end of the day, it's not going to compete with the best teams in the NHL. If this team's going to do well, it's going to be because of their goaltending there. An A plus with Juuse Saros and a serviceable backup in Kevin Lankinen. Uh, Last year, Saros almost dragged them into a playoff spot alone. So I look for him to probably do something similar again this year. As for the future outlook, they do have a pretty good stockpile of prospects and some all right young players. So that's going to be a B plus.
As Cam mentioned, the only way this team's going to make the playoffs is if Saros absolutely puts them on their back and carries them and drags them into a wild card spot. None of the additions that they made really moved the needle for me. So, in terms of our projected Western Conference standings, we have them in around the same spot as last year, just missing out, just on the outside looking in. They missed the wild card spot by one.
Just a overview of where we rank them individually and where they rank in the standings. Nick had them 23rd. Noel had them 18th. I had them 19th for an aggregate standing of 20th in the NHL. I had them making the playoffs in, I believe, the first or second wild card spot. I can't remember which wild card spot, but I had them making the playoffs. And to me, what it comes down to is I think the defense is solid enough, and they added a couple defensively responsible forwards that I think there's going to be a lot of boring hockey played in Nashville. But I think that UC Saros is going to drag them to the playoffs just by way of being a top three goalie in the NHL next season. And I don't know. I just have a feeling Nashville's going to be there. So Barry Trotz better hope after the moves he made this season that I'm right, because if they don't make the playoffs, it's going to look pretty weird what they did.
So I don't think we mentioned this in the video as well. They have a new coach as well.
Oh yeah,
Is it
Andrew
Andrew
Burnett
Burnett?
too.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
So he could play, I mean, whichever way you want to swing. He could either propel them into a playoff spot, or it's a new coach going to go through some growing pains, and they really struggle off the bat. So that's another little fact that you guys should know.
Yeah, this there's a potential for a honeymoon period at the beginning of the season with these young
Hmm.
guys eager to make their mark in the NHL lineup alongside the new coach and the practically new GM. So it could be interesting to see how their start goes, but I don't think they're going to finish as strong despite Juuse Saros' efforts.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this video today, guys. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys are enjoying this series. Make sure to tune into the next video and please like, comment, and subscribe.